All right, so the idea for the next 20, 25 minutes or so is to dive deeper into some of the topics we have discussed and maybe open it up to some of your questions towards the end that we can also answer. And maybe I'd like to start with a slightly different perspective than what you have presented so far. You're talking about the investor's perspective. If I'm a founder, I'm a startup CEO, how should I think about AI in terms of, has it become a necessity for me to survive in the world today? How critical has it become for me from a competitive perspective? And what should I do to ensure that I'm in the right place?
Okay. That's a good question. I guess it depends on what you're doing. So in some businesses, it's absolutely existential that you use AI in what you do. That's your entire value proposition. So for example, in my case, we're trying to use AI to discover drugs better and faster. So if we didn't use AI, we really wouldn't have a differentiator. In other cases, you're using AI in sort of the supply chain of the value that you're delivering to the customer. And it might form part of your value proposition, but not your overall value proposition. So if you want to be AI from day one, then it's obviously very much required. If you want to use AI to improve an aspect of your business performance, then I think it's wise to think about how AI could potentially improve your business operations or improve the service or offering that you're giving to customers.
Yes, I agree. It's all about, do you need this muscle to provide the value you want to bring to the market? This is the right technology to do so. There is value, again, in our industry, for example, up until a few years ago, AI as a word just attracted a lot of interest. So there was a value even, be a bit cynical in just putting that on your, on your brand. You need to be careful because today I also already see some fatigue around that because here comes another AI company. And even in the largest imaging show in December in Chicago, they put them in a special floor. And those companies became like a little bit frustrated. Oh, we are there. We're kind of the AI innovators, the guys that may not gonna do that. And so I think, as the industry matures, and as the company matures, it knows how to put what they do first, and then AI enabled is great if that really brings them, long-lasting competitive advantage.
I'd add one other thing. If you all remember SaaS, about 5 years ago, everybody thought SaaS was a bit of a flash in the pan. Maybe it worked, maybe it won't. Most software now is sold this way under a subscription model. And I think the same is going to be true with AI. It's going to be needed in most applications. But again, it depends on the application. I mean, just because you want to do AI doesn't mean it's the right thing to do for your company. You prove there's a business case here first, because it's going to take effort to do it.
So as founders or startups are thinking about AI, does it become an add-on to their core offering, or do you believe that AI needs to be the DNA of the company for an AI company to be successful?
I can take that even maybe expand it not only to a startup, if you're okay, like also for large company that have the same dilemmas, right? So in some way you can think about this question, do you need to develop AI muscle? Similarly, like maybe 40 years ago, a technology company would ask, do we need the software development capabilities, right? Because it's a technology that will allow you to do new stuff. So the simple answer is yes. The more complicated answer is, in my mind, again, it's still you need to answer what I'm going to do with that. And do I have maybe an advantage in going that way? Do I have the data? How much I need to invest? Where I want to build, buy, or partner? For example, a decision that we made in the company, whole areas, we say we're going to partner around that. It's expensive, it's risky. There are a lot of smart people moving fast and do that, and we're going to partner around that, and we'll build the muscle around the other areas. Because AI is expensive, it's probably going to get cheaper over time and more commoditized. All Googles of the world are working to democratize AI. So it is between the high-level decision of, yes, we do need to develop a muscle, versus, hey, we're going to pour $billions of dollars right away without knowing what to do with it. The right decision is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and to Iain's point there, to take that metaphor, I mean, there are enough people here, especially people sitting in the front, who remember what the internet was when it just started, right? So you remember, 20 some odd years ago, I'm the CEO of a shoe company, And then all of a sudden, my board is saying, what's your internet strategy? I'm like, what do I need the internet for? I sell shoes in stores. And then, all of a sudden you go like, hey, CIO, because there was no CTO. CIO, what's his internet thing? Go get me a strategy because the board is on my case. And the CIO is a desktop support person, goes, I don't know. So there's a young person's like, hey, you play around on this Mozilla thing. Get me an internet strategy. And they're like, oh, okay. So then they go out and they don't know what to do. And maybe they pay McKinsey & Company or Bain millions of dollars, and they come up with a strategy, and then everyone's like, the CEO's like, oh, this is our internet, our e-strategy. And they're like, checks off a lot of boxes, he keeps his job, and then 10 years later, they're out of business because of Zappos came along, right? Okay, so we've seen this movie before. You remember in the early 2000s how many internet sort of things there were? We were sitting here 20 years ago, we just changed, basically I'd be thinner and wearing different clothes. But we could be talking and replace AI with the internet. All right? So in like 5 to 10 years, no one will be talking about AI anymore. Whatever happened to AI? Well, of course, because it's part of the furniture. It's how you do business, right? But it's going to be adopted in a non-uniform manner across industries at different rates, solving different problems. So, yeah, if you're basically looking at investment opportunities in the internet, except it's AI. So that's one, sort of useful mental way of approaching the problem.
I agree with you. The other thing to think about too is that when you build this, the AI is just a component, and it has to integrate with the rest of whatever your product is. And so linking that with how people interact with your product, the user interface, is going to be crucially important.
So in terms of AI being a component, it's easy to think about it when it's a product company. You can visualize that AI is doing a part of the solution and the rest you build. How should one think about AI when it is the core is not a product? Maybe it's a services company. Maybe the offering is something different. Maybe it's a hard tech. How should investors think about AI in that context? Or how should startups think about AI in that context?
Well, maybe I give you an example, actually. I use my credit card on my iPhone here. The credit card companies usually have lots of AI to detect whether you've got specious or unworthy transactions. It happened to me, actually. And the only reason I knew about it was because I'd linked it into the phone, as the Apple Wallet, as it happens. So in a service company, you have to think about the chain, the value chain for your customer and what their customer experience is.
So your question, Ashish, refers to companies that are not like providing the end solution, or
yeah, their offering may not be a product. Maybe it is a services company providing services. Maybe it is a hard tech and not really software.
So regarding services companies, sometimes they even could be more beneficial. For example, think about the amount of rigor you need to do until you have an algorithm that can detect cancer in a safe way through regulatory. It's expensive even to take it just from a working algorithm to a product that can be used, right? But for example, a company that has a lot of people doing a lot of repetitive job and they're selling a service, having AI automated could work maybe 80% of the time and still create a great ROI. So this could be an example even for a lower barrier for entry for AI.
I think if your value proposition to your customers that we're an AI company, then you've got a very limited lifespan unless you're able to pivot. So I go back to the past because it's always a good sort of indicator of the future, usually. In the early 2000s, there were billion-dollar companies like Exodus or Equinix or various other companies that did hosting. Because at that time, it was extremely expensive and difficult to put up a website and have it be able to handle a lot of traffic. If you had 1 million people come, it would crash your servers and you'd be dead. There are billions of dollars, HP, lots of companies, this is before the cloud, would come up with this high availability sort of like database, tape drives, servers, firewalls, okay? And then come 2005, 2006, you've all read Mark Andreessen's essay, Software is Eating the World, right? You have the open source movement, you have hyperscale now. So now, literally, with the same account and credit card that I use to buy, Christmas presents on Amazon, I can buy a hyperscaled, fully redundant, like every single thing that I would need with a few clicks. So what happened? Well, those companies that focused on solving a short-term difficulty If they didn't pivot, they're dead. The same with AI. So there are certain companies that go out and say, we're AI and we can solve a whole bunch of different problems. Well, they'll probably get eaten by the McKinseys or the Accentures of the world. But it's very difficult to productize sort of a short-term need. But if you want to build a service model, then that's fine. I think that if you're not able to productize the AI or concretize the value that you've got to a customer in a repeatable and scalable fashion, then you're going to be a services business and you're going to go the route of IBM, which is not a bad thing necessarily. It just depends on what you want to do.
And just taking it a step further, we talked about the companies and their strategy. We talked about products. I want to take the conversation to the market and the customers. How is the market or the customers reacting to companies pitching AI? Are they mature enough? This is too early in the hype cycle? Is it somewhere in between? What should companies do to be successful in having a good conversation with customers so they can truly communicate the value of what they're doing without hyping AI too much and benefiting from the hype of AI where they can?
So from where I see it, like the customers have few types of customers. So the early, like the famous diagram, right? So they're like the early adopters. In our world, is the academics. They like to play around and they wanna be in the forefront of AI. They don't necessarily plan to pay or use it long term, but they wanna be in the forefront. So they work a lot with startups. They wanna try and evaluate. There is the other segment that, like Handol was saying, the guys at their boss asks them, what is your AI strategy and what we're doing about AI, because I'm reading a lot about it. And sometimes they want to check the box, and they feel they may be not the early adopter type of evaluation, but they need a good story internally around it. And so this is a lot of the market. It's really like you see how this question cascade from the CEO to the guy that kind of were sent to bring a good AI story to the organization. And connecting back to our call, the ones that are really make a headway are the ones that are establishing credibility and value and intimacy with the customer and helps them to solve a real problem. Very quick example, one of the most successful companies in our area is a company that solved a very, you can call it, it's not a small problem, it's a big problem, but in a very elegant way to help physicians understand if a stroke requires intervention or it can use drug to do that. And many times today, it happens remotely. The radiologists need to wake up at night, go to the hospital. There are a lot kind of things that happens that, time is brain in stroke. They're able to use AI. They send an email. I was sitting next to a very senior neuroradiologist in a restaurant. He got an email showing him a verdict by AI. Yes, he can get drugs. He doesn't need to call the stroke team. And he was giving an answer on the spot. So you see how AI was a big part of it, but the story was much bigger, and they know how to tap into problems that is a real pain point and solve this problem. And now they have a brand. They have AI, but customers buy them because of what they provide.
I think one of the things you have to be careful from the market point of view is the bad press you might get. You may have remembered a few years ago the Google Gorilla story. Anyone remember that one? Google published an application that if you put in an image, it would detect whether you're a human, whether you're an animal, things like that. So 3 gentlemen, apparently from Central Africa, put it in and were classed as gorillas. Google, and this is, were very embarrassed, and when they came along to explain why this happened, they claimed that we hadn't got a big enough training set. And that's not a sufficiently good answer, because you're going to have to really have a massively large training set to be able to detect everything. So from the market point of view, you've got to be very careful whether your AI works correctly. So it'd be interesting to know, in your case, Rand, what the long-term feedback is on this, because the advantages of doing this are huge. The story that Rand just told is a classic story, that this is a real benefit because it happens quickly, there's less intervention, and it's got a higher success rate. But if you get it wrong, it's probably worse than most other things.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think one really concrete thing is it going to do better than a human? And until it can do better than a human, it's just R&D. It's an academic paper. The whole reason why we're talking about AI now is, we were in a winter of AI until 2011. And then the paper got published, AlexNet, that, oh my God, it's really good at classifying images. And then it got better than a human. And then now you have papers where people are looking at sort of radiological images, and a deep learning model is able to predict, something better than a human doctor. All right, that's exciting. That means that it's making real progress. Until then, who really cares? It's the province of R&D. But once it gets better than a human, and can continue to get better than a human, then it becomes interesting from a business perspective. So the question is do I adopt AI if it can do better than the way I do it now? And if it does, then wow, okay, now you got to pause. You can make a business case around that, right? And just so that, so this is a really good example of the quality of your training set, right? So diversity in AI, it has many meanings, right? It's not just about like having people from diverse backgrounds, but it is very important that you do that, because if you don't, you're going to misclassify. If you have no Africans in your training set and everyone's white, then it's going to misclassify. If you don't have diversity inherently in your training set, right, you're going to get a bad model, because it's not going to be able to generalize to all, it's not representative of your population, right? So it's very important that AI, a high-performing model, has to be, by definition, diverse and balanced. You have to have enough cases of each thing that you want to classify. Otherwise, you're going to have really bad performance, and it's not going to do better than a human.
Yeah, just one last thought. So today, let's say in our area, there's still some, question: is it accurate enough? Is it better than human? All the safety things. Zooming out, I'm pretty sure that price, performance will go better, like any other industry. Those problems will be solved. It even today, getting to pretty impressive accuracy. And those things like today, you can't buy a car without electrical window, right? Maybe in the past it was kind of a gig and you had to pay extra for that. Today, just something you expect from a car. We won't be able to sell our system without ability to detect stroke automatically or tumors and so on a long time, as time goes. It's just a question who gonna be the winners and who gonna be providing it and gonna be fast to the market.
I want to add one more comment, and that is the example I showed of the left ventricular piece is about augmenting the human in this, and that's, in a sense, what Rand's solution is doing. So you should differentiate between augmenting the decision-making process or automating it. I think we're a long way away from automating, but augmenting, absolutely, we're there.
So we have time for a few questions, and I thought I'd open it up for the audience. There's one at the back. Maybe, yeah, take this. Yeah, thank
you. Thanks. How are you providing explainability in AI for either the business owner or the teams that are working with the machine learning models? Or I guess, what's your advice on that? What are you seeing?
It depends. In some cases, if you're, depending on the model that you're using, you don't really have a clear view of being able to explain why the model, classified in one way or another. This is a very important question. In certain cases, like for example, if you decide on a treatment plan for a sick patient and they could die from this, you need that explainability, or else you're going to open yourself up to tremendous liability. Right? But in some cases, it's kind of like, why did I serve this web user this ad versus that ad? It doesn't really matter. You can prove it empirically that there's an uplift. So I think that in certain cases, it's extremely critical, and it's going to be the delimiter of adoption of AI. But in some cases, in some industries, it won't matter as much. And the short answer is I don't know, but that's maybe something that Rand can do, because that's what they work in.
No, it's true that it's like a concern, or at least a topic in the industry. How can we count on an algorithm to recommend or identify clinical decision if we can explain why it gave it? But another way to look at it, and I know there are companies like Google working to make more explainable AI, but the way to look at it, is just based on performance, because I'm not sure that a driver in the road that didn't notice someone crossing the street can explain why they didn't do it, right? And if you can prove that an algorithm can detect 99% of the time a certain problem, and a physician can do that only 85% of the time, so it's still system-wide, it's beneficial. And you need to develop ways to really audit problem and train the model correctly and make sure before you put it in clinical use that those 99% are really have been tested on a wide enough population, and it's not just a couple of patients that you base your claim on. So it's a company, I don't have a yes or no answer, but there are multiple ways to look at this question.
Yeah, I was going to add one other thing, that DARPA, which is the Defense and Research Facility component in the US, has identified explainable AI as one of the topics they're looking at in the next 10 years, because it's not obvious how to do it.
Of course, that's because they want to know if they kill someone. Yeah. How do they do that?
Yeah.
Sport of baseball has changed dramatically with the use of analytics. Now, is any of the professional teams sort of using AI to analyze the analytics so they can predict from the batter's point of view what pitch is going to come, and from the pitcher's point of view what pitch would be most effective?
Well, so there's a company called Sport Logic that's based out of Montreal, and a bunch of PhDs in data science and ML that are applying this, I think, to hockey first, because they're in Montreal. And they don't have a baseball team anymore. But here's a good example, and I don't actually think you really need ML for that. You can just use standard statistics or data science to look at sort of the distribution of pitches from the past and look at all of these things and just use standard sort of regression or existing data science techniques. You don't really need AI necessarily, unless it's a problem that I'm not necessarily aware of.
Much more effective to use AI to predict.
Well, so a statistical... Oh, yeah, but that's normal statistics as well in data sciences. You can take a look at the data that's been collected and then just do regression and then make an output. It's not necessarily, it's not necessarily like advanced machine learning. It's pretty simple. It's actually not that hard if you were to build a statistical model depending on the task that you're looking at, right? But to do it in the time and based on a small number, like for example, you have a new baseball player who first time stepping out into the big leagues, facing a pitcher. That's a cold start problem. You don't have any data of that batter against that pitcher, so how do you make a decision, right? That is a hard problem, right? But if you're looking at like, some all-star going, and looking at the data, body of data, and having enough data and then trying to look forward, that's not necessarily the province of advanced machine learning. It's certainly something that can be done. But I believe there are some companies doing it. I mean, I don't know if I'd build a business around it, but it would be a really good sort of one-person lifestyle business. You could probably make a lot of money.
Yeah, hi. Actually, I would just pick up on that last point, Handol. I think you want to get a machine learning researcher to actually refine the commercial application. It's all about betting and making money, right? But anyways, I would just like to say my name is Neil Clegg. I'm from a Chinese pharmaceutical company. We're very interested in AI because what we're interested in is processes that are faster, more straightforward, simpler, and I think the ultimate aim for us is automating. All of which is to say that your talk today was addressed virtually directed at us, and I thank you for that. But my question is very simple. What are our strengths here in BC in terms of AI?
I'll let you guys, I think you're more familiar.
Yeah, in applied AI, specifically in computer vision, visual computing, probably fintech, banking, health, and maybe cybersecurity. And then robotics, for some reason, we seem to be very good at that. And then there's advanced AI that we're also really good at, but that's probably a bit further out from commercialization.
I'd also add we're strong in optimization, which is kind of scheduling, and also representational learning, auctions, and the stuff that incorporating physical models into the deep learning module. That's a significant strength here at the universities, anyway.
If I can ask a follow-up question to that, where is the talent for these capabilities coming from? Are companies? Sorry. Sorry, my question as a follow-up was, where is the talent for all these capabilities coming from in BC? Do we have good academic programs that have emerged that are really creating that output? Are companies training their employees because they know what they need? Or maybe it's a hybrid. Can you just reflect on that?
So there's a number of different answers to that. The people are coming in from not only Canada but overseas to come into the graduate programs. That's very clear. But there is a distinct lack in the capability to train people. And so Handol is part of, and us and a number of companies are part of a supercluster project to try and train more people to do this, especially women, where you want to have a bit more of a gender balance.
I have nothing to add.
Just to let you know, we're very much the beneficiary of Donald Trump's policies. In the sense, if you go and look at PhD level students in computer science specializing in machine learning, there's a disproportionate number that are from Iran or China, right? We're able to attract some of the best and brightest from overseas, in addition to the people that come here. Our challenge really is retaining them and having them continue to work in British Columbia, as opposed to going to the Silicon Valley or various other areas. But that's a very small concern compared to the fact that we're generating tremendous amounts of talent at both UBC and SFU. SFU is very strong in visual computing. UBC is one of the leaders in artificial general intelligence or decision making, game theory, et cetera, et cetera. So we have some tremendous talent that's coming out of the universities. It would be great if you could invest more money in companies that could retain these people and leave them here so that they can generate more value for us in British Columbia. But we have tremendous talent here. Unfortunately, right now, a lot of them go work for Google or Facebook. But increasingly, the Amazons and the companies are moving to Vancouver because these companies go to where the talent is. And so we're also seeing this as a magnet for attracting large companies to come and hire.
One more question here.
We're right now in the middle of this NCOV crisis, primarily in China, and as a case, just to speak to, this seems like an obvious application for contact tracing. Of course, there will be privacy concerns because of people don't want their government to know where they are, but maybe there's an opportunity there, or maybe you can talk to that as an example of how to differentiate true AI companies from not true AI companies. And maybe you can talk generally about that.
Okay, we're in the space of drug discovery, so I guess that's somewhat relevant. This is a virus, and it's an antiviral, and it's an immune issue. Generally speaking, most AI companies in the space of health have jumped on the bandwagon and are now cooperating to try to find novel ways of discovering sort of a therapy for this virus or doing drug repurposing. But if you're talking about like in terms of the
Not just the therapy, but also contact tracing, trying to epidemics.
Yeah, so I think there are some public health companies that are looking at that. I don't know if you really need AI as much for that. The other thing is there are fairly well established sort of epidemiological methods and models to kind of show viral outgrowth that are firmly rooted in the area of normal statistics, and these are very well used by most health professionals. So I don't know if AI would be the best way to do this when you've already got a machinery that's fairly accurate in terms of tracing a lot of this stuff. But I don't know enough about that area. But I think that there are a lot of AI companies that are trying to be opportunistic and try and address this issue. But at the same time, you also have to look at how fast an institution or a community is willing to embrace these new methods, right? I mean, I can bang on the window all day and say I've got a better method, but if everyone's like, stop bothering me, I'm busy doing what I know how to do, that's a different story. So it's not necessarily a technology problem in the sense that there are a lot of people who are skeptical about AI, and rightfully so, right? Oh, well, what does AI do? But at the same time, you still need to have a measure of openness, right? And say, well, let's try this method and see if it works. In the middle of a global pandemic, it might be harder to make that decision. We need to be open about these things and take a flyer on this AI that's relatively unproven versus let's use the tried and true methods that we've built up in the last 20 years to try and predict these things. So I wouldn't say it's an AI problem or a technology problem. It's probably more of a culture problem.
Yeah, I'm not familiar enough with the problem to to give an answer. You assume that it's known that China has a lot of using AI to for surveillance or track a lot of population, and you can assume it might be also useful in cases useful in positive cases like that where you want to track things like that. But it goes back, I think, to for every problem you need to understand the problem first very well, and then you can judge if AI or what type of AI is the right tool to apply on that.
And I think it's worth pointing out as well that just because you can do it with AI doesn't mean you should do it. If you've got existing methods that are easier to do, because it takes time to do it. And in this particular case, you've got to accumulate an awful lot of data, which you could use data analytics to do.
I believe we have a Chinese pharmaceutical company in the house. Maybe they could work on it.
So I think it touches on a topic which is ethics in AI. And maybe today's Scratching the Surface isn't the forum to deep dive on that. But I want to thank our panel for their contribution today, very informative presentations. Hopefully you have picked up a few points from this conversation today that enable your conversations with the startups that you're going to review later today and have a more intelligent dialogue with them. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Telzel for the rest of the program.
Okay, everyone, a big hand for all four gentlemen.